On November 18, 1978, over 900 people died in the jungles of Guyana in what was at the time the largest single loss of American civilian life in history until September 11, 2001. Most of them didn't die by accident. They were told to drink poison. Many of them were children, and the man who gave that order had once been seen as a hero, a preacher who promised equality, community, and salvation. This is the story of how Jim Jones built a paradise and how it became a graveyard. James Warren Jones was born in 1931 in rural Indiana. Neighbors later described him as an intense, unusual child, fascinated by religion, death, and control from a young age. He organized funerals for dead animals and preached to other children before he was even a teenager. As a young man, Jones became a Pentecostal preacher, but he stood out for something unusual in the segregated America of the 1950s. He preached radical racial integration at a time when many churches refused to. His early sermons drew in working-class families, particularly black families who had rarely been welcomed so openly in a white-led church. In 1955, Jones founded his own congregation in Indianapolis, the People's Temple. He built a reputation as a healer, claiming to cure illnesses during services, and as a champion of the poor, running soup kitchens, nursing homes, and free health clinics. To many struggling families, Jones didn't look like a threat. He looked like hope. By the 1960s, Jones had convinced his congregation that nuclear war was coming and that they needed to relocate somewhere safer. He moved hundreds of followers to Northern California, eventually settling the People's Temple in San Francisco. There, the church grew rapidly. Jones was politically savvy. He built relationships with city officials, appeared at public events, and positioned the People's Temple as a genuine force for social good. He was even appointed to a city housing commission. On the surface, he looked like a respected community leader. But inside the church, control was tightening. Members were pressured to give the temple their income, their property, even their homes. Jones demanded absolute loyalty, and dissent was punished. Public humiliation, forced confessions, and increasingly physical punishment. Former members later described a growing climate of fear beneath the community's public image of unity. Jones also began cultivating what former followers described as a cult of personality around himself, claiming at times to be a prophet, a healer, and even a reincarnation of religious figures. Longtime members who'd once been drawn in by his message of equality found it harder and harder to leave. By the mid-1970s, journalists and former members began speaking publicly about abuse within the People's Temple, claims of beatings, forced labor, and financial exploitation. Facing growing media scrutiny and legal pressure, Jones made a drastic decision. He would move his congregation somewhere no one could reach them. He leased a large plot of remote jungle land in Guyana, a small country in South America, and named it the People's Temple Agricultural Project. Followers simply called it Jonestown. Thousands of miles from California, cut off from easy outside contact, Jones told his followers they were building a socialist utopia, a self-sufficient community free from racism and inequality. For some, it may have genuinely felt like the fresh start they'd been promised, but isolation gave Jones near total control. Members worked long hours in harsh conditions. Food was often scarce. Armed guards patrolled the property. Passports were confiscated. Contact with family back home was monitored and restricted. What began as an escape from persecution had become something closer to a prison. Concerned family members back in the United States had spent years trying to reach relatives inside Jonestown with little success. Their pressure eventually reached Congressman Leo Ryan, who agreed to travel to Guyana in November 1978 to investigate conditions firsthand, along with journalists and concerned relatives. At first, the visit seemed to go smoothly. Jones staged a welcoming, orderly tour of the compound. But during the visit, several Jonestown residents secretly approached the visiting group, asking to leave with them. As Ryan's group prepared to depart from a nearby airstrip with those who wished to leave, Jones's armed followers ambushed them. Congressman Ryan was shot and killed, along with several journalists and one temple defector. It was the only time a sitting U.S. congressman had ever been assassinated in the line of duty. Jones knew this attack would bring immediate consequences. Believing that authorities and the outside world were closing in, he gathered the entire community together that same evening. What followed was something Jones had rehearsed before, so-called white nights, drills where members practiced responding to a supposed impending attack, sometimes including talk of mass suicide as an act of loyalty and defiance. This time, it wasn't a drill. Jones told his followers that soldiers were coming to torture them and their children, and that the only way to protect their dignity was to die together by their own choice. A large vat of grape-flavored drink mixed with sedatives and cyanide was prepared. Recordings from that night, later recovered by investigators, capture Jones urging his followers toward what he called revolutionary suicide, while several members can be heard expressing doubt or fear. Parents were directed to give the poisoned drink to their children first. Armed guards stood at the edges of the compound. By the end of that night, more than 900 members of the People's Temple were dead, the majority from poisoning, some from gunshot wounds, including Jones himself. Nearly a third of those who died were children. When American officials arrived days later, they found a scene almost impossible to comprehend. Bodies spread across the compound grounds. A community that had once promised equality and hope ended in mass death under one man's control. The phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid," born from that tragedy, entered the English language as shorthand for blind, dangerous loyalty, though survivors have noted the drink used that night was actually a different powdered mix, not the brand the phrase refers to. In the decades since, Jonestown has become a defining case study in how cults form, how charismatic leaders isolate and control followers, and how ordinary people, seeking community, safety, and belonging, can be led step by step into unimaginable tragedy. Jonestown wasn't built as a place to die. It was built as a promise of paradise. What happened there stands as one of history's starkest warnings about the cost of unchecked power and the dangers of following anyone without question.